Hello, this is Cheryl Lampard. I hope you're well. Sorry, let me just adjust that. I hope you can see me okay. I'm just going to refresh the page here to make sure I can see what you're seeing. Yes, okay, wonderful. I can see what you're seeing. That's great. So welcome to Knit Matters. If somebody could just let me know that you can hear me okay, that would be wonderful. There's a few seconds delay before I see on the screen what I've just said. Let me see if I can see you on my phone. The more sophisticated the technology gets, the more complicated it seems to be. Anyway, I'm sorry it's a few minutes late, I know, but a few seconds late, but let's see. Okay, let me see if I can see you. As long as you can hear me, and if perhaps somebody, when you join in, you can let me know that you can hear me, that would be great. Oh, somebody said something, that's great. Let me just check. Hi, oh, you said the sound is fine, that's wonderful, thank you. That always is such a relief when I know that. Otherwise, I'm talking to myself and nobody wants that, least of all you. Anyway, welcome to Knit Matters. This is season 2, episode 17. Now, every week I do say, whether you're a regular viewer or you're new to Knit Matters and you're watching for the first time, I'm very grateful to you for taking the time to join me. And I really do mean that. It's a great privilege to be able to be here and helping you with your knitting. So thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to join me. Or, of course, if you're watching the replay later, thank you too for taking the time out of your day. So I'm Cheryl Lampard. I'm an image consultant. My company is Style Matters International. And throughout my life, I've had two passions, which are sewing and knitting. And I also used to be the proud owner of a yarn store in Brighton and in England. And one of the great joys of that, apart from being surrounded by all that gorgeous yarn, is that you get to teach people how to knit. And that's a real joy. And all these years later, I'm doing it again via a different platform. And you know, I said this a few weeks ago, and again, it's true. It's almost better teaching now because I can reach more people and introduce them to this wonderful fibre art that is knitting. So I'm going to move the camera now. This is always the tricky bit. So do look away if it makes you feel a bit queasy. I'll try and say hello when names pop up. Forgive me if I miss you. It's a bit tricky moving this, looking at the camera and trying to follow sort of on the phone. So if I miss you, it's not deliberate, and please forgive me. If you have any questions, do put them in the feed. If I see them while I'm going along, then I'll obviously answer them. If not, I'll answer them as soon as possible afterwards. So I do welcome your feedback, and do tell me what you'd like to see in future weeks, what topics you'd like me to cover. And whatever your comments are, I'll promise to respond as soon as possible afterwards if I don't see and answer your question at the time. Okay, so this is the tricky bit. I'm going to move you, so just keep talking amongst yourselves for a moment while I get this hopefully in the right place. It's always a bit tricky. There's my bit of chalk. Oh, Debbie's Ladue is watching. Hi, and Dawn. Oh, you are wonderful. You always join, and I do so appreciate that. And Rebecca Vaden Young is watching too. Hi. Oh, sorry, Risa or Rika. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrongly. I read it wrongly, didn't I? Okay, let me just make sure that you can see me. I'm going to kind of put my chalk mark here. This is where my hands need to be, and sometimes I wander off the page, and that's terrible then. Right, let me just put this here, and we will start. What we are talking about today is, the topic today is corners for borders, which is kind of tricky to say. Hello. I've got myself, I need to mute my phone, otherwise I'll be getting playback. You'd think I'd never done this before, wouldn't you? It's just, Facebook changes things from week to week sometimes, and it's a bit tricky knowing what they're doing. That's my excuse. It's probably just user error, as it often is. Anyway, right, so when we're talking about borders, A variety of knitted items have borders or edges. Knitted jackets, cardigans, shawls and blankets. Afghans certainly have edges, and you might want a border to just stabilize the unfinished edge, and or sometimes it's both, to provide a decorative finish. Now there's lots of ways to do borders. Sometimes it's knitted in as part of the item, so you would cast on, knit up, do the border and then carry on with whatever you're knitting. But you know, that's all very fine, but you might not decide until afterwards that you want a border. You might decide that you know, the pattern that you're doing, you might want to actually change the pattern and dispense with the ribbing and put a border on instead. So you might want to do that afterwards. Now this is a sort of sampler of a Afghan. It's more like a cushion, a pillow size really, just as a sample, but this is what was called a sampler Afghan. So it's quite kind of homely and rustic, and it's really nice. And what I did for the border here was simply, it's a seed stitch border, and I literally went along and picked up all the stitches along this edge, knitted the border up to, you know, the width of the pieces, the squares, and then I went to the next edge and starting from here picked up and went along all that edge, and so on and so on. So each time I picked up, I had to pick up from the edge of where I'd finished the previous border and carry it on. And this works perfectly well for something like this. It's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But there are times that you want a corner that's a little more defined or shaped in some way, especially if it's on a garment, to finish that off properly. So for example, like this. So in this example, I have, oh Patricia, hi, welcome. So in this example, I have created a border. I actually picked up the stitches along here and here in one go with a circular needle, and then I just knitted my border on. Now, one of the things that you have to remember with corners, that corners are wider, obviously, at the outer edge than they are here. So you have to develop a method of, you have to decide on a method of how you're going to create this shape. Now, a lot of patterns, and they can be done with increases or decreases or even short row techniques. Now, this particular border, many a book will tell you to do a cast on border. So you would start here and cast on the number of stitches that you want and then knit up. But to do that, you've actually, and then you can stitch this border on afterwards if you want to. And a separate border is absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But working out the number of stitches for a border like this when you're doing it from cast on and knitting upwards can be something of a maths challenge if the pattern doesn't already have a border. If the pattern has one and tells you how to do it, that's great. But if you decide you want a border and then you've got to work it out, well, yeah, that's when the problems can start. I'm going to give you a quote from one of the books. I was looking up to see a number of books, how they all did their borders in different ways. And here's a quote from just one book. It says, measure all the side edges and multiply this number by the stitch gauge. So measure all side edges, however many you've got. So in this case, it might be 4, whatever. And multiply this number by the stitch gauge. So you would multiply that by your gauge. You would have to know your gauge. And that's not so hard to find. Then find the required number of decreases, because you're going to decrease from this outer edge and go inwards, by multiplying the band width by the row gauge. So now you've got to think about your row gauge. Add the number of decreases for each corner to find the number of stitches to cast on. Now, if you love figuring out mathematical computations, well, go right ahead and knock yourself out, and that's fantastic if you do. But if that leaves your head spinning, just thinking about it, I've got an easier way, which I'm going to show you in a moment. And let me tell you, I'm not making fun of this idea. It's just, it can actually be quite challenging to work that out. So, and the other thing is, doing it this way when you cast on, you've got to know how wide you want your border or the bands for your border before you start, because you've got to work out the decreases to sort of get to where you want to be. Anyway, we're not doing it that way, and it's a great way to do it, but I've got an easier way. And what we are going to do is pick up the stitches. And I'm going to show you other little samples that I've done to show you that you can do it separately. Here are other little samples. It's just a lot easier for me to show you on small samples of how to do a corner in several different ways. Okay, and you can certainly, as I said, you can do your border first and then attach it. What I would suggest, if you choose to do that, and okay, let me just backtrack a second. Sorry, I'm confusing you, I think. So these borders were all done from the top and going outwards. So this was my starting edge, and then I'm going outwards. I'm going outwards to shape the corner. And doing it this way is great because you can decide on how wide you want your border when you're actually knitting it. You don't have to know it in advance. So if you decide that actually that's a bit too much, you can, you know, you can judge that when you're knitting it. You don't have to know in advance. But what I would say, if you're doing this border separately and then attaching it afterwards, which you can certainly do, you can either knit it on or sew it on. Doesn't, you know, it could just as easily be this corner that you've chosen to do, or this one, whatever you want to do, and you've done it first and then you're attaching it afterwards. You can certainly do that. You've still got to do a little bit of calculation because you need to know how wide it needs to be and how many, you know, coming vertically. So if you choose to do it like this, I would practice it perhaps on a small item first, like a child's garments or a cushion, so it's not so overwhelming. Because if you're doing this on an adult garment, let's say it's a long jacket and it's a full adult size, you've got a lot of button back, you've got a lot of band probably to work up here, but you would still be able to work it out because you just have to count up your rows. So that would tell you how many stitches you need that way. And again, you'd count the width of the piece. So you'd know how many stitches you need for that. So it's not the end of the world, but I'm going to show you how I did it by picking up and how to do that corner, and then you can decide how best you want to do it. Okay, so I'm going to start on this same piece, and I'm going to actually start part way along the row so you don't have to watch me doing the whole thing, and nobody wants to watch that, and it will take too long. So I'm just going to start a few rows, a few stitches along. There's a thick bit of my yarn there which I'm going to just snip off. Otherwise we're going to have a problem with that. So now this is where you want a circular needle or DP ends, and we're going to start, I'll just start a few stitches away. So I'm going to start maybe 5 or 6 stitches away, but clearly if I was doing this for real I would start up there. So what I want to do, what is important at the moment, is I want to be knitting, I want to be picking up using with the yarn from the ball of yarn coming from my right side. If you're an English thrower knitter, if you're an English style knitter, you're working with this hand. So you want the ball of yarn to come from your right hand. Now that might seem obvious because yes, you are knitting from the ball of yarn, but normally if you're picking up stitches, you're kind of you're doing it this way and you're working. So you're working from the ball of yarn, but you're picking up and your tail of yarn is there, so that when you get to the other end you would turn and you've got the ball of yarn as your yarn supply, still using that. Well, we're going to do this slightly differently. So I want to make sure that I'm going to work from my ball of yarn. So really what I want to do is make sure my long tail is long enough to pick up the amount of stitches. Now that is sometimes a movable feast. If it's a very big garment, then you really don't want to run out of stitches, sort of 100 stitches along when you've got another 200 to pick up. If it's a child's garment, well, again, same thing, but it's a bit more manageable. One way to sort of estimate how much yarn you might need, because there's no foolproof way, is you can just wrap the yarn round your needle and just do it maybe for 10 wraps, and then you know if that is that 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yes, it is. And then just sort of unravel it, and you know if that's 10 stitches and you need 100, you need sort of 10 times that amount or whatever. Again, it's not an exact science, it's an estimate, but it'll give you an idea. Anyway, I know I don't need a huge amount for this, but so let's pretend I've got enough of my long tail, and I'm going to work from that in terms of, once I'm working from my ball of yarn, but I need this, and you'll see why in a minute. You'll see why, because you don't want to run out, basically. Okay, so I'm going to pick up just a few stitches along here. It's probably about 5 stitches until I get to my, and I'm not going to be that specific, but I want to make sure I'm picking up my edge. So I'm just literally picking up my stitches. Now I'm going to get to my corner stitch in a minute. Of course that's not going to go in, so this is my corner stitch. Okay, now what you want to do there is make sure you mark that corner stitch with a stitch marker, and I would use one of those that pins in or clips in. Okay, you think you remember, but I promise you, actually I'm going to pull that out and do a few more because you really can't see so well. So I've already got my stitch marker there. Okay, I'll do that again. I want you to be able to see that we've got a few stitches on there. Okay. Rather than just managing 4, I want a few more on there. Okay, so this, I've got a bit of a knot there because I wove my end in. Anyway, your corner hopefully will be a bit cleaner than that. Okay, right. Now I'm going to go this way, so I want to pick up that stitch. This is why you need to mark your corner, because once it gets onto your circular needle, or you can do it with DP ends, you'll be able to see it clearer on DP ends until you start, moving things around, as it were. But you think, oh, I'll remember it, I'll know exactly where that corner is, and then actually as the knitting all goes on the needle, it's much harder to see. So how many have I done there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I'm going to do another 1 just to make it, or 2. I want 2, 3, 4, 5. I want 5 either side of my corner stitch. Okay, so just imagine that I've picked up all along here and all along there. Right, now this is where you'll see why I want to make sure my ball of yarn is in the right place, or I'm knitting with the right amount of yarn, because what I'm going to do, I don't want to turn this because I want to make sure that I have my right side. I'm going to start my first row on my right side. So all I'm going to do is slide my circular needle along, and then I'm ready to start with my yarn. That's why I said make sure you've got the ball of yarn and you're casting on so that your long tail is long enough to pick up the stitches, but then when you slide the stitches along, you want your ball of yarn so that you can work from that. Okay, so all we're going to do, and I'm just going to do, which one am I going to do? So yeah, okay, so I'll just show you the garter stitch mitered corner, which is this one, which is, oh, that's the eyelet one, sorry. This is the one that This is the one that's on this side. Gosh, I'm all over the place today. This is the one that's on this side. I'm just going to do it in garter stitch so you can see exactly what I've done. And you could just as easily do it in stockinette stitch. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You would knit up to where your marker is for your center stitch, okay? Then what we're going to do here, for this particular one, we're going to make one. And what we do to make one is we pick up that loop. This is always a bit tricky, that first one. And we knit into the back of it. Now, if you were making one in ordinary stocking stitch, you'd have a bar of yarn line across between the two stitches. We've got to create that here. Oh, this yarn is splitting. Okay, there we go. There's my stitch. That first one is tough. Now I'm going to knit my corner stitch. And now I've got to do the same thing again. I've got to create a stitch. I've got to make a stitch. And again, it's tricky on this first one. It gets easier, I promise you. So we pick that up and we knit into the back of it. And it's very, very tight there. But it can be done. There we go. Once you're over that first row, it gets a lot easier. Okay, now we would just knit to the end of the row. So imagine I've knitted right to the end of my row there. Now I can turn. Now I can turn. So I'm going to bring my circle around and we're going to do the garter stitch. So I'm still just knitting. Now on this row going back, you've got to remember to purl that center stitch. Okay, and once you've done a few rows, you can see it. So this is the stitch. Now I'm going to purl it, and the rest is garter stitch. I'll do one more row of this so you can see what's happening. Oh, look at that. There's me telling you to knit from the ball of yarn. Guess what I didn't do? I didn't knit from the ball of yarn. I knitted with my long tail. Oh dear. Don't make that mistake. Anyway, fortunately my long tail is long enough. Oh gosh. Yes, don't do what I've just told you to do. Make sure you are knitting from your ball of yarn. I can't believe I did that. Anyway, there we go. So I'm just going to show you this next row. And you really just repeat these two rows. I cannot believe I did that. I must have got myself tangled up. Okay, because what happens is that you will play chicken yarn, or yarn chicken, rather, and you'll end up with not enough yarn. But it's not the end of the world. You can always join it on again. Okay, we're coming up to where, oh dear, we're coming up to where we need, now remember we made one stitch. We're going to do the same thing. This time it's a lot easier because I can now pick up from this bar here. Okay, and I knit into the back of it with my short long tail. I knit my corner stitch. I pick up the bar there, knit into the back of it. Oh, good job this was just a little sample. Okay, I can't believe I did that. Oh well, happens to the best of us. So yes, learn by my mistakes, do. Okay. Yarn chicken is going to win. Oh dear, it's defeating me. But look, you can see how that is starting to form. And then you just knit out to however big you want your border to be. Okay. You would just knit out however you want it to be. Let me just show you another little design for that, which is this one. This Eyelet Corner, which is really quite pretty, and that you could do on a child's garment, or particularly if you're already doing a sort of lacy or open garment, something like that would be nice, because you're sort of following the design of the eyelets, if you will. Again, super easy to do. You can do it either with garter stitch or with stockinette stitch. So all you would do here, I have already marked my corner and I've already done a couple of rows just to get started. So you would knit up to your, just before your center stitch, and in this instance you do a yarn over. then you would knit your stitch, then you would do another yarn over, knit, 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 and so on. And then on the row back, you would, if you're doing garter stitch, you would obviously knit, but make sure you purl that center stitch. If you're doing a stockinette stitch, you'd purl this whole second row, and you would just repeat that for as wide as you want your border. So that is a very simple way of creating corners for your borders, which I hope makes sense. Okay, so there you can see that. Just, it's a bit hard to see there, isn't it? Because again, it's flat and it's straight on the needle. As you knit more, there's my stitch marker just kind of getting in the way of the stitch there. But of course, as you get that wider, you're going to see that start to sort of shape out. And as soon as you bind off, which is what I've done here, you know, the shape it'll spring back into shape. So then, if you decided that's the way you want to do your border, then, you know, let me just pull this out. So if I can pull that out quickly. Yep, there you go. So then you could attach your border afterwards. You could stitch it on, you could knit it on, graft it on in some way. You know, however you want it to be. I like this way of making a border because it does make life easier. You can always judge. Sometimes you think you know you want an inch for your border, and then sometimes actually an inch is too much or it's not enough. If you've cast it on and done it the other way, it's going to be trickier because you have to end up with that many stitches so it will fit. Whereas this method, you can make your border as wide as you want it to. Okay, so I think that's a really nice, easy way of doing borders, and it does really finish off a garment edge, so or a blanket edge, however you want it to be. So I hope that has given you the inspiration to work some knitted borders. I'm going to put the camera back up. Oops, just to sign off. Thank you all for joining me. Oh, here we go. This wiggly thing here. This is, oh, there we go. Okay. Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget, oh yes, don't forget our friends at Mary Maxim do offer a 20% discount on one item. It's the highest price item in your cart if you decide to buy anything, but you must use the promo code Cheryl, and that will get you 20% off one item in your cart. And also, this episode and all other episodes of Knitted Matters are uploaded to the Knitted Matters page afterwards and to our YouTube channel. And where else do we go? Oh, it's on our website, on the Style Matters website as well. Golly, mind blank. If you're looking for this one later, it's season 2, episode 17. Anyway, I hope you found that enjoyable, and I hope it's given you inspiration for sort of adding borders to things. Do play about with it. You can put all sorts of stitch patterns in. You can even do wonderful borders with, you know, two-stranded knitting or other patterns. But it's just making that corner. That's what we're really doing today, just ideas for making that corner. A mitered corner isn't as hard as you might think. And I do find this way of doing it a little easier. Okay? But do play about with it and let me know how you're doing. I'm always happy if you put things on the Knitted Matters page, or if you have any questions, just private message me or put it in the thread, because if you have the questions, other people probably will as well. Anyway, thank you again so much for watching, and in between now and next week, I do hope you stay well. So stay well, stay calm, and stay knitting. Bye for now.